A new generation is coming.
Let's go get them.
What for? They're not speeding.
They're nerds.
But if they plan to survive college,
Touchdown!
yeah, they'll need guts.
It's time for us to flex our muscles.
They'll need strength.
There isn't a muscle in this room.
They'll need help from the biggest nerd of all.
You are such a nerd. Damn right I am.
The new nerds on the block team up with the masters.
Are you married?
Better. I'm a gynecologist.
When they go head to head with their most heinous enemy ever.
We got those stinking nerds right when we want them.
Robert Carradine, Curtis Armstrong, Morton Downey Jr., and Ted McGinley star in Revenge of the Nerds 3, The Next Generation. And this time, guess who's getting the last laugh?
Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is a review and a rant on the 1992 made-for-television comedy sequel, Revenge of the Nerds 3, The Next Generation. The Next Generation of garbage. Because this is yet another tired, unfunny, unnecessary, made-for-television sequel that belongs in the trash heap. I swear the only reason this was made is to garner some interest in a potential Revenge of the Nerds TV show, which there actually was a pilot that was made, and it wasn't aired, and it was never picked up, and I will talk more about why that was the case in the near future. But yeah, it was either made to garner interest in a new TV show, like the syndicated Weird Science show, or it was made just as a quick, easy buck. Fox Television was like, hey, we've got the rights to Revenge of the Nerds, so let's do another Nerds movie or two. And Fox at this time was desperate for ratings, so I'm honestly not surprised if that was the case either when it comes to their decision making and why they decided to even bother making this. So it's directed by Roland Mesa, who prior to this did a lot of TV shows, and after this did a lot of TV shows and TV movies. And you can definitely see why. This is a very one-note film when it comes to the direction. There's nothing really that creative when it comes to the camera work. And it doesn't even really look and feel like a TV movie, like a big event film. It looks and feels like your average everyday episode of a cheap sitcom. And it's painfully evident when it comes to any attempt for comedic timing or anything that's trying to be somewhat cinematic. It looks incredibly flat, and as a result, it's a hard film to watch because it's just so flat and uninspired when it comes to the direction. And that overall vibe continues with the screenplay, which for some reason is from the same writers of the first movie. So Steve Zacharias and Jeff Buhai, who wrote the first film, they come back and they write the script for this TV sequel. And it's another one of those sequels where it seems like the original writers forgot what they wrote in the first movie or in their previous work, and they just write something that feels completely tonally and structurally against what they had previously established. I never understood for 1 second why original screenwriters would come back to a franchise and then would write scripts that are so jarring in terms of how they fit with the previous film that they wrote. It's like they completely forgot what the continuity was, or they completely forgot the integrity of characters. Like, for instance, the character of Lewis, played by Robert Carradine, that a lot of people really like, this character is completely butchered in this movie. At the start of the film, he's ashamed of being a nerd, so much so to the point where he has a ponytail like he's Steven Seagal for some reason, and he doesn't even want to be called Lewis. He doesn't wear glasses, he wears contacts, and you have lines of dialogue where he says things like, I wish I was an alpha beta. And I guess that kind of does fit because he did try to join the alpha betas along with Gilbert in the first movie, but it never was really established that that's really what he wanted the most. He and Gilbert decided to do it because they didn't have a house, nobody picked them, and so they were like, hey, alpha betas said that they need somebody, so they thought we were perfect for it, so they fell for it and got pranked. And you would think after everything that he went through, when it comes to what Stan Gable and the Alpha Betas put him and his brother and his friends through, that he would never even remotely consider the thought of, I wish I was an Alpha Beta. I wish I was a jock. And on top of that, wish that he was Stan's friend. Because there's lines of dialogue where it's like, I wish I was your friend. Because Stan Gable returns, and once again he uses Lewis and manipulates him, but this time around it's not that he manipulates him because he's a nerd. He manipulates him into being his lackey because he makes him think that they're friends, but really he's just using him. And Lewis, or Lou, he's such a dope that he can't realize that and doesn't see it. And it's just one of those things that's like, why did they think this was a good idea? To have a Revenge of the Nerds sequel and have the main lead of the entire franchise in Lewis come back, and then the majority of the film, he's ashamed of being a nerd, can't even laugh like a nerd because it's embarrassing. If it was to set up this epic return, the return wasn't epic at all. It's a massive letdown. He puts on the nerd shirt and the glasses, and he cuts his ponytail off, and he shoots a squirt gun in a mirror, and then does the nerd laugh. Wow, that was so cool. That was definitely worth the wait. And then he starts his nerd strike, and it doesn't go anywhere because he gets framed for misappropriation of college funds, and he then goes to trial, and that whole thing is convoluted as fuck. This script is a mess. It's either lazy and has next to no effort put into it, or the work that's put into it just completely misses the entire point of the first film. And the new additions suck. Oh, Adams College, because the nerds took over, is now Nerd Nirvana. And it's run by the nerds. And it's owned by the nerds. And that's why the Alpha Betas are so willing to get into a lot of shenanigans and start bullying the nerds when they're given the power to do so, because of the film's really daft plotline where it's like, you know who would actually be a viable candidate for dean of the college? Stan Gable. Does he have any qualifications? Does he have any credentials other than the fact that he's a police officer and he was an alumni? No, but whatever. Stan Gable's the new dean of the college because we need a conflict. So he becomes the new dean of the college, and he uses that power to set up some group of alpha betas who dress up in ski masks and dark clothing to harass the nerds. So it's just the same fucking shit as the first film, but it's nowhere near as funny, and because of the fact that it's a TV movie, they can't go very far in terms of the humor, and they can't even go as far as the PG-13 sequel did. So it's just one of those things, it's like, okay, we're just playing the same beats and they're off key. Why is this a thing? And then you have the new nerds. Oh my god, these new nerds are lame. They are not cool. There's nothing about them that's likable or something that you might want to emulate if you're not a nerd. These are the kind of nerds that you understand why they get bullied. And you actually might want to join in because you're sick and tired of seeing them stink up the screen. So you have these two new nerd newcomers in Harold Skolnick, who's the nephew of Lewis, and I think it's Ira Pappas, who's played by Richard Israel. Yeah, it's Harold and Ira. And Harold and Ira are just the same characters as Lewis and Gilbert. It's the same writing, it's the same kind of personality. It's almost as if they just wanted to recast the two for a remake, but then they realized, nah, that's a little bit too much, so they instead went with a sequel. I mean, the actor who plays Harold, it seems like they cast him on purpose because he looks like he might be related to Robert Carradine. And then the other new nerds, you got this British nerd who's just this fat ass, and it's supposed to be funny because he's fat. Ha ha, fat guy falls down. Ha ha, fat guy stuffs his fat face with food and almost chokes laughing. It's so funny. And he has this British accent, so it's even funnier. No, it's not. It's annoying. You got this Elvis impersonator who's South Korean, and that's the joke. That's the joke here. Steve Toyota. He's from the South. South Korea, that is. God, so painful and pathetic. You got the token girl of the group who she's there and she's just a weirdo. She's just a weird character who's into archaeology, and she's shy and reserved and the usual when it comes to those kind of characters. I think it's insinuated she's meant to be a love interest from one of the characters, but they never go anywhere with it, so she just comes across as a cheap gag. She's weird, and she really likes archaeology. Okay, so you got this other character, an African-American nerd who you might actually recognize. It's Chi McBride, who was one of the ghosts in The Frighteners. And he's been in other things. And his whole bit is that he's a parody of Malcolm X. And they beat that joke into the ground so much that it goes 6 feet under. It's just so bad. And yeah, I mean, all of these new nerds are terrible. The new generation of nerds, they don't do anything to help the franchise. If anything, they completely kill whatever potential this franchise might have had left. And the only time the film perks up is when you get returns from the original cast members. So when Curtis Armstrong shows up again as Booger, but even then, it's not nearly as enjoyable as what you see in the first two films. And yes, you do have returning cast members other than Curtis Armstrong. You've got Bernie Casey, who has a cameo as UN Jefferson. You got James Cromwell as Mr. Skolnick. You've got Larry B. Scott as Lamar, and Brian Tochi as Takashi, but you don't have the same actor who played Wormser. Instead of Sean Whalen, who you might recognize from People Under the Stairs and other films. And then you also have this other guy who plays Gilbert, Mike Greenwood, because of course Anthony Edwards is not going to return. And for some reason they have Gilbert like overweight and fat and having a receding hairline. Like, why did we need to do that? Why did we need to have Gilbert look like that? He looks like a fat slob. Why do we have to do that? That's lame. They made him look like the South Park nerd in the World of Warcraft episode. Well, not quite that extreme in terms of how fat he is, but it's a similar kind of look, that's for sure. You got Ted McGinley comes back as Stan Gable. You've got Julia Montgomery comes back as Betty. I don't like the fact that they retconned the second movie. I really don't, because I felt that Lewis and Sonny had a way better relationship and way more chemistry. And I really would have liked to have seen those two again instead of Lewis and Betty. But that's just me personally. And Ted McGinley, he's fine with what he has to work with here. You can tell he's trying his best. And the same goes for Morton Downey Jr., who plays Orrin Price, this despicable, slimy leech who attaches himself to Stan Gable and manipulates him and gets him to campaign and eventually win the position as dean at the college. But despite Morton Downey Jr.'s best efforts, I mean, he's limited with what he has to work with here. Morton Downey Jr. is the kind of actor who works better in mature programming. Like his original show, the Morton Downey Jr. show, which was a wild and crazy precursor to the Jerry Springer show, and episodes of other mature television shows like Tales from the Crypt. His performance in Television Terror, one of my favorite episodes of that show. He is fantastic in that. And having him here in this PG landscape, it's a waste of his talents, and it's a waste of his personality. It's like you just cut his balls off. It's like if you had Andrew Dice Clay in a Revenge of the Nerds sequel, and he plays the bad guy, and he's subject to television censors. It just doesn't have the same punch to it. And it's too bad, because Morton Downey Jr., he's very game here. He puts himself on the line here. He does a lot of stuff, some physical gags. He even subjected himself to getting painted to look like a candy cane. So he does put himself out there, and at times, because of how much he actually does give to the role, his scenes are actually somewhat watchable, alongside with the moments that he and Stan Gable, Ted McGinley share. So Orrin and Stan actually make a pretty good evil duo, but the heroes are just lame. The new nerds, they suck. The old nerds, they're barely in the movie and don't have much to do. So by the end of the film, when there's a reunion with some of the old nerds and there's this trial, and it's so convoluted because at first the trial starts with, okay, we're going to try to see if we can exonerate Lewis. And then it turns into, let's start grilling Stan Gable about his involvement. And then it goes from that to putting Orrin Price on trial. And it's just like it's the trial is just an excuse for cameos from the original cast members and to tie everything up when it comes to the plot line. That's it. That's really all that there is. And there's just so many familiar beats from the first movie. The nerds get bullied by the jocks. They get kicked out of their dorms, or actually no, I think they still have their house, but of course it gets vandalized. There's pranks. Instead of the nerds using this cream that makes people's skin burn, they use something that accelerates pimples. And that leads to like the one gag in the film that made me chuckle, where one of the jocks, not one of the nerds, one of the jocks, he uses the cream and he's on a date with a girl, and then all of a sudden it's a horror movie. The film's shot as if it's a 50s horror movie, and with the music and the direction and the editing, and it's a parody of the werewolf movies. So instead of the guy slowly turning into a werewolf frame by frame, it's the guy's getting his face covered in pimples. And then you have the girl who's just screaming her head off like a scream queen. That was like the only scene that really stood out to me in a good way, is that sequence. Other than that, everything was just, like I said earlier, lame, tame, and ready to maim. The music, it's your typical stock, forgettable TV score. The cinematography by Zoran Hochstadter, nothing remarkable whatsoever. The editing by Seth Gavin, meh. I can't believe this cost $2 million. This looks like it cost $100,000. If that. I mean, it does not look like a $2 million film by any means. So, yeah, it's one of those films where it's not funny, so it doesn't really provide that much in terms of laughs. The new additions to the franchise are either unnecessary or poorly conceived. The pacing is incredibly slow, and it's very monotonous, and you have the moments where, okay, the film has to stop for a commercial break, and it's so obvious. I hate it when TV movies do this. There's a better way to structure your plot for ads. You don't need to have it be so fucking obvious. And it's just one of those films that it doesn't make you feel good like the first two. The first two are enjoyable despite their flaws. This just has nothing but flaws for the most part, and it's not very enjoyable. It sucks. It really does. But as bad as this film is, it's nowhere near as bad as the fourth film. Nerds in Love makes this look like a fucking masterpiece. But anyway, thanks for watching my review and rant on Revenge of the Nerds 3, The Next Generation, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.